and welcome to episode 2 of Talking About Our Generation with me, Gary McVeigh-Kay.
And me, Simon Warner.
This is a place where we put on a pair of sturdy walking boots, pack our Kendal mint cake, and traverse the hills and dales of Rock and Pop's glorious past. So, Simon, how's things for you at the moment?
Things are okay, thanks, Gary. The return of football has changed my mood slightly, although I must admit that these overblown practice games that we're watching on the TV, they don't quite have the zest and the energy, do they, of the real thing?
No, and I've got to say, as a Leeds United supporter, I wanted the season to resume, but I'm happy for everything to end now and to go for a average points system, because then we can go without any quibble, without any, football's getting in the way of our promotion party. That's all I can say.
Absolutely. And I think eventually, Gary, you will end up losing in the playoffs. Are there going to be playoffs?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. So we'll lose in the semis next year, like we did last year.
I wish Leeds well. I hope they come up, and I think to have Bielsa as a manager in the Premier League will be great.
Well, we're probably the only club that's got a socialist manager in place. So
Since Alex Ferguson left, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're on with today's show. We're thrilled to introduce today's guest, a man who's not only influenced the sounds we listen to since the late 1970s and beyond, but he actually created many of the sounds that we listen to from then to now. So welcome to the show today, Martyn Ware.
Hello, very nice to be here.
Hi, Martyn.
Well, I'm not actually there, but to be amongst you digitally. Yeah.
You're down south. We're in the north, Martyn. You're down south.
Yeah, but my heart's in Sheffield.
So how's lockdown been for you then, Martyn?
Well, I mean, I'm lucky because I live in a nice part of London, right next to Regent's Park, and so like getting out and walking and doing all that, and walking into town takes about half an hour. So I decided from early doors to use my exercise time and do a kind of photo study of lockdown London. So I've been doing that. Also, I thought I've got to have something else creative. So I've been planning for like 18 months to do my autobiography. So I've taken this opportunity to start writing that. I've done 20,000 words already. And my literary agent is on trying to get a deal right now. So hopefully, fingers crossed, somebody will pick up the bait and it should be coming out at the latest spring next year.
Well, scenes. Now, there is a term that's bandied about quite often in relation to particular cities of the world where musical moments happen. And if we're thinking of some examples of famous scenes, certainly of the 20th century, we might think about bebop arising in New York in the early 1940s, all the way through to Detroit and the soul and rock scene in that city, acid rock in San Francisco, scenes in Manchester in the late 70s and early 1980s as new wave and post-punk exploded. But there is no question at all that there was a scene also in the great northern English city of Sheffield during the early 1980s. And what we'd like to do is just explore that a little bit. I mean, I'd like to ask Martyn a couple of questions. I mean, maybe set out by saying we, in the world of sort of pop studies, we theorise scenes, but in a city like Sheffield around 1980 or 1981, did you get a sense you were part of a scene, or is this something that happened retrospectively?
Well, Sheffield has always had a kind of reputation to the outside world and really inside Sheffield itself as being Britain's largest village. So it's 600,000 people, 700,000, but it has in the centre, which is where I always lived. I always lived in council houses near the centre of town. There was always a vibe of you were going to bump into the same kind of people if you're doing creative stuff, and a lot of people had rehearsal studios in the centre. For instance, in London where I live, you're not going to get that because you can't afford to have stuff in the centre of London. It's impossible. But back in the 70s, there was a lot of kind of empty small engineering works that people would rent out for peppercorn rents, that people used as rehearsal spaces. So people like Cabaret Voltaire, us, Clock DVA, loads of people had rehearsal spaces that turned into kind of cultural spaces and party spaces, and a bit, you know, in our mind, we were completely deluded, of course, but in our mind, we thought it was a bit like, you know, Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable or something. Yes. We were trying to recreate that kind of vibe. So in those terms, and also sticking it all together in a way, in roughly the same location was the campus of Sheffield University, which was just up the road. And of course, we all had fake student union cards so we could get cheap beer. So we used to mix with the students. So we used to take the piss out of them, but you know, we actually benefited greatly from their taste in music and free concerts and stuff like that. I saw Rock's music for the first time.
I have to interrupt you, Martyn, there to say that I was one of those students with a genuine ID from 74 to 77, and so I sort of saw things from the other side. That's fascinating that you actually saw the university campus as a place where you were going to encounter new music.
Well, I mean, you know then. So Sheffield was, I mean, I love Sheffield to death. The people are great. You know, there's nothing I don't like about it. But I have to say that in the 70s, there wasn't a lot to do. I mean, you know, the Students' Union was vibrant, you know, and there were always lots of new music going on, always lots. It was on the touring circuit of bands that were trying to break the national scene as well. Once you got outside there, you'd got basically Sheffield City Hall, where all the big bands used to go, which we used to break into via a secret door that we found, and because we couldn't afford to buy the tickets. And I know, don't do it, kids. But on the other side, there weren't many small venues for bands to play. There was a lot more things like, I mean, basically, it's like working men's clubs, a few pub venues like the Broadfield in Sheffield, where. But it was really, that was a kind of cliquey scene, and it was like very old-fashioned kind of rock stuff.
Just coming back to that Sheffield scene then, Martyn, when all those bands were emerging, like Human League and Cabaret Voltaire, I guess you were like bumping into each other in rehearsal space and things like that. The thing that people want to know about any scene really is, was there collaboration, or was there competition, or, you know, were you all clamoring for record deals, or what was going on there?
No, right. So here's the thing. There were things like Mr. Kite's Wine Bar on Division Street, and various pubs around there. Obviously, the Hallamshire. What was the one at the top of? I used to live in Broomall Flats at that point, and I'm trying to remember.
West Street,
the Raven.
The Raven, yes.
We used to go in the Raven a lot, and all those on West Street, basically. So, but you used to bump into the same people all the time. So. I remember distinctly, the first people who ever kind of became our mentors and friends, who we saw as the coolest of cool, were Cabaret Voltaire, you know, and Mal, you know, Richard Mallender, and Chris Watson, and the other one. I mean, we're all still in contact, right? So I've done various sound installations with Chris Watson, who's one of the world's leading real-world sound recordists now, and Mal is a lecturer in Brighton University, you know, etc. So we're all they were our entry into the scene. They were really the dons of the scene, and to have their help, and even just to be hanging out with them in parties and house parties and stuff, it was like we were the anointed ones. Because they saw what they saw in us. When I say us, I mean me and really me and Ian Marsh at that point was kind of kindred spirits, as in being mavericks and outsiders, rather than being part of the rock scene or wanting to be known as musicians. We always just say, look, the reason we're playing synthesizers is, you know, we can't play guitar. We've had no musical training. the synthesizer at that point, you can only play monophonically. You can only play one figure at a time, which suited us down to the ground. So, and they love that kind of candor, and it's a very Sheffield thing, all that stuff in it. Anyway,
Can I also ask you about a fabulous place I loved in Sheffield while I was there? Do you remember Rare and Racy, the second-hand
my God,
record store?
So Rare and Racy was literally responsible for my musical education.
It was wonderful.
Because as I've mentioned, used to live in Broomhall Flats, which is, 5 minutes walk. As soon as I had any money, I mean, my parents were incredibly poor, lived in a two-den house until we moved into the council house. We never had any spare money. I mean, we didn't get any much spending money or anything. But as soon as I got a job, I was working at the Co-op burning bacon and stacking shelves. As soon as I got any disposable income, I spent it all in Rare and Racy because it was cheap. A, it was cheap. B, there's an entire world of music there. I know we're going, oh, kids today, they don't know. I mean, in those days, you only heard what you. I had older sisters, and I was lucky. They bought quite a lot of pop records and stuff, so I loved all that stuff. But I had no real knowledge or sense of ownership of music. So I used to go and buy, I don't know, something just based on the look of the cover. Yeah. Anything that was experimental. I'd buy computer music. I'd buy experimental jazz, bebop. I'd buy soundtracks for films that nobody had heard of. I'd buy a completely genre agnostic taste in music. Completely.
And Rare and Racy can be thanked for that.
Yeah. And then what I'd do is I'd listen to them. If I didn't like them, I'd just take it back the following week, get half of the value back and put it towards another record. And so you had this thing. They made a bit of money out of it. You got an education and you had a sense of ownership of the music that you accidentally discovered. I remember buying one particular album and it had this really weird kind of, I was into surrealism heavily at that point, this weird surrealist cover, and they were called The Animated Egg.
Wow. This
band, and they were a prog rock band. And the album cover was like being on a trip, basically. It was all like Oz magazine at that point, wasn't it? And like, swirly whirly, fucking Dayglow Paisley, And I'm going, this is great. I'm just going to look at this while I play it. And it sounded terrible. But actually, somehow it didn't matter. Because, like, you'd find some really beautiful, unexpected music that had a cultural context. So you'd look at the covers while you listen to the music. You had the physical interaction with the vinyl. You had to make an effort to listen to it all the way through. You couldn't skip like you did. Well, you could pick it up and do that, scratch the record. But that's how I learned to consume music and learned to be eclectic. And that I wasn't to know at the time, but it was a fantastic education for me in terms of writing stuff that didn't really sound like anybody else.
So as we've seen, our guest today is the magnificent Martyn Ware. His writing and performing credits range from the Early Human League onto Heaven 17 and the British Electric Foundation. He's produced global worldwide hits for Tina Turner, Terence Trent D'Arby and many others. He's a pioneer in creating uses of sound technology and a visiting professor at Queen Mary's University of London, a member of BAFTA and a fellow of the Royal Society of Art. So a very busy person. And Martyn, what I'd like to ask you first is, when you first began writing music back in Sheffield with Human League and then later Heaven 17, because of your interest in sound, did the technology that existed at that time influence the songs that you were writing, or was it the kind of songs you wanted to write that made you find sounds to put it across?
A bit of both, really. We always started from kind of creating some kind of groove, I suppose. I can only remember about 3 songs that we started from kind of a lyrical idea or a top line idea. It was always about the way that the futuristic sounds kind of engendered like a kind of soundtrack to an imaginary film in our heads, really. And from that point, we'd go, well, that reminds me of, I don't know, Blade Runner or something. Okay, then why don't we imagine that we're one of the characters in Blade Runner and what would they write? Or, you know, it's always been for us, certainly in the early days, about approaching songwriting from an unusual series of angles, you know, rather than trying to copy what was currently popular. We've always been running up the down escalator, basically. You know, we never make it easy for ourselves. But I do believe that the kind of lateral way that we approach songwriting, have approached it over the years, has led to the kind of leads to a depth and authenticity, which means that people still appreciate the songs in a kind of timeless way now. I know it sounds a bit arrogant. I don't mean to be. We actually had a stated ambition when we were writing early that we wanted people, we used to say to each other, we want people to be listening to this and enjoying it in 10 years' time, because that's as far ahead in the future as we could imagine. You know, we thought we'd all be dead by then.
And did you find...
imagine being 30, you know, God.
And did you find it liberating as musicians, where you weren't, as you said earlier on, you weren't people who picked up guitars and then discovered synthesizers. You came it, you know, from an electrical point of view. Was that liberating for musicians at that time?
I like that electrical point of view. sounds like I'm going to rewire a house. Brilliant. Right, here's the scoop. So when we bought our first two synthesizers, one was like a modular synthesizer, where you can make any sound you want, and a lot of the sounds nobody ever heard. No presets. Same with the Korg 700, the monophonic synthesizer. That was my first synth. No presets. You had to design every sound from scratch. So if we wanted a kick drum, we had to actually design it from scratch. It wasn't like you could dial it up and go kick drum. It wasn't a drum machine. You know, there wasn't a magical button that you could press that make it sound like an electric guitar. You had an impression in your mind of what a sound sounded like. You'd aim for it by sculpting it using oscillators and filters and envelope shapers and ring modulation, and you'd get nowhere near it. But the sound that emerged fulfilled a similar function. So therefore, you have built into the process and a de facto original palette of sounds. Now, anybody who's starting now, I mean, I teach commercial music songwriting and production in a place called Tileyard at master's level in London. I'm the principal. Yeah, watch out, I'm going to cane you. And I'm always saying to my students, you know, imagine having a very limited but extremely flexible palette to work with. You know, if I gave them an exercise saying, you're not allowed to use any presets on any synths, drum machines or anything, on virtual or real synths or drum machines, they would absolutely panic, because they don't need to learn that. It's all pre-tuned.
And it's also worth saying that, you know, we've hinted at this, that the guitar was of less interest to Human League, Cabaret Voltaire, yourselves, in that early 80s period, and bands like Pet Shop Boys and Depeche Mode and so on were escaping the straitjacket of the guitar. Do you still feel as if, were you deliberately rejecting the guitar, or was it just, you wanted to say no to guitars?
No, we actually had it on our second album. You know, Queen used to say no synthesizers, right? On their albums. We had no guitars.
What did you not like about the guitar?
You hurt your fingers. And they're hard to play. Well, yes. You can make a fantastic racket on them if you learn a few chords and you can do the punk thing. Yeah. I just thought but I'm being serious, sort of semi-serious. It just felt very old-fashioned to me. I mean, when I first started listening to music, pop music, and buying my own records in my early to mid-teens, I bought a guitar. I bought a Gibson SG copy and tried to play it, and it really hurt. Horrible, sharp still think, now I'm going. And you've got to do that, what, with your fingers? And I've only got little hands.
The first 8 years are the hardest, Martyn. I have to
yeah,
say.
well, I'm not, I'm just, I'm not knocking people who want to do it. I mean, I'm not that stupid. And I I mean, I'm big fans of, oh my God. I mean, I'm luckily enough, I can count amongst my friends, Robert Fripp, who I think is my favorite ever guitarist. But there's loads of guitarists, and when it's used creatively, it's the most wonderful instrument. It transcends everything for me. I just don't particularly want to play it. I think it's too complex. It tends to lead you down a certain style of songwriting, which is fine, but it's not what I wanted to do. And in fact, I realized this. I'm kind of post-rationalizing all this, but that's what we're doing anyway. I realized this when I first wandered into a music shop after we'd done the Luxury Gap, the second M17 album. And there was a book of sheet music of I've never read or written any sheet music in my life. There was a book of sheet music of Luxury Gap, and I'm looking at this, and I can read a little bit now, and I can understand what it means. I'm just very slow, and it's like we wrote "Who'll Stop the Rain" in like 9 flats. I'm going, I'm a fucking genius. That would have never happened had we written on guitar.
It's also worth saying, I mean, I was a great fan of the whole post-punk thing, but I also liked, if we can still call it, black music. I love the music coming out of...
A massive influence for me.
Yeah, I mean, the whole disco thing, which was regarded as something you ought to avoid, I never did. And then as we moved into the early 80s and bands like Heaven 17, you were bringing in these kind of funky dance things.
We only ever went to funk clubs.
Yeah.
Well, interested. When I first started going clubbing in Sheffield, I went to the Penthouse down by Castle Martin.
Penthouse, yes.
Yeah. 10p drinks night.
Absolutely.
Watered down beer. That's why everybody ordered barley wine, because they couldn't water the barley wine down. 10p drinks night. Watered down wine as well. Horrible, horrible. And, that was all, at that point, it was glam and kind of Alex Harvey band and Bowie, of course, and were massive influences on us. But really, as soon as you got to like mid to late 70s and onwards, we were all me and Glenn and Ian were interested, not so much Phil, was American dance music, really, and funk.
Techno and house. And
no, techno and house came from us. Well, not just us, but I mean like us, Tubeway Army, Kraftwerk. So we were doing, what I'm saying is we were listening to that stuff before techno and house started.
If we could turn to you work as a music producer then, because you were sort of so precise in the production of your own sound and how you went about things for the bands that you were part of, how did you adapt that working with other artists? Because obviously, most notably, you worked on massive global hits for people like Tina Turner and Terence Trent D'Arby. And did they come to you with a sound that they wanted, or
no? What
did
it
you
was,
have a lot of input in that?
What it was, right. So the people like the early Human League stuff in the business. It didn't translate massively into sales, which is why Virgin engineered a split, and I know now they've omitted. They liked the kind of modernity of it, and what they wanted ultimately was a smattering of modernity rather than the full-blown kind of Human League M17 experience. In fact, Tina Turner originally, I mean, I did a version of Bold Confusion for her for the first B.E.F album, which I'm still very proud of, by the way, and it got released as a single, and it got to 50 something. She didn't have a record contract at the time. Can you imagine this? But anyway, they came back to me to do to write some stuff for Private Dancer. Now, nobody knew that Private Dancer was going to be selling 20 million copies. I said to them, because we were so kind of, I think, part insecure and part arrogant about our own ability to write for other people, because we only wrote for ourselves. We said, no, we don't really write for anyone else. I kick myself to this day about this, but it's probably cost me a few £1 million. But we don't write for anyone else. But I'd love to do a couple of cover versions for your first album, which is Panther. So I suggested to her that we did Let's Stay Together by Al Green. And she jumped at it because she loves Al Green and she grew up with that. And and I said, what I think we should do also, because the album's going to be coming out in 1984, why don't we do a cover version of Bowie? Because I knew she liked Bowie. Why don't you do a cover version of Bowie's 1984? And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like a comment on 1984 from 1984 as a woman. And I thought, this is so cool. We're going to do that. Anyway, as you know, Let's Stay Together was a big breakthrough hit, and it became the biggest selling 12-inch record in American history when it came out. You can't go wrong with Tina's voice if you produce it properly.
Yeah,
That performance was all one take, no drop-ins, completely intact. She'd completely figured out how she wanted to deliver that story within that framework. So that's why that was a massive hit. And then, of course, as you do these things, you realize it's not just about being modern. It's about having the musical sensibility that I didn't realize. I mean, I suspected I'd got as a natural talent, but I didn't really. It's not for the likes of Sheffield lads to think like that, you know. There's always a bit of insecurity there, or not for the likes of us, isn't there? And I started thinking, hold on, I'm learning a lot of stuff here from the masters. And the people I was working with, the producer, co-producer I worked with, used to work with. He was a trainee on the Beatles sessions, for instance, and he worked with Heatwave and Rod Temperton and Michael Jackson. And I'm going, I can't. This is the finest education any person can get, you know.
So in the last section of the show, we ask our guests to come along with a piece of music that means something to them that they want to discuss for a few minutes, and we chime in with our thoughts. And Martyn, do you want to kick us off and tell us what you want to talk about?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was fascinated by this single that my sister bought. And I didn't really know why it fascinated me so much at the time. And I can analyse it now, which I'm gonna do. But it was MacArthur Park by Richard Harris.
The parted pages and were pressed in love's hot, fevered eye, like a striped pair of pants. MacArthur Park is melting in the dark. All the sweet green ice is flowing down. Someone left the cake out in the rain. I don't think that I can take it, 'cause it took so long to bake it, and I'll never have that recipe again. Oh
no! And it was number one, actually, I think, when it came out. And again, I'm post-rationalising it, but what I intuitively felt at the time is pretty much a genuine representation of what I'm going to say now. I've always been obsessed with story records and narrative in songs. And I was very much impressed with the idea that like Phil Spector, I think the famous quote about you've got to tell the story in this 3-minute time frame or 3.5-minute time frame, and each story has to be a self-contained entity. And I always loved those songs like Indiana Wants Me, or things that tell, or Wichita Lineman, which happens to be Jimmy Webb as well. And I realise now I just love Jimmy Webb's songwriting. I love Up Up and Away. I love pretty much everything Fifth Dimension have ever done. And Jimmy Webb, I think, is the greatest songwriter on earth. I just think I've seen him perform live loads of times. I love I love a lot of it, his stuff that's lesser known. So, MacArthur Park. I couldn't understand the lyrics when it first came out. But it always kind of the kind of curiosity of the. I know it's all metaphor now and everything, and obviously I know what it's about now. I think I do. But then it was like, I'm going, put the cake, you're making another cake. What's wrong with you? you know, okay, your cake got away. What are you making a fuss about? And all this dramatic, you know, I just didn't understand it. But the words and the lyrics
with this song, I mean, talk about being the centre of a story. I mean, everybody will be familiar with it. I'll just give you the first lines of this song. Spring was never waiting for us, girl. It ran one step ahead as we followed in the dance. Between the parted pages and were pressed in love's hot fevered iron like a striped pair of pants.
Oh,
I mean, to be there in amongst that, and from the second you hear it, trying to, what the hell is this, you know?
no, it's his grasp of poetic metaphor is beyond anything. Add to that his understanding of knowledge of how different chord combinations can manipulate, switch between major and minor, or ambivalence in an unexpected way, and then changing tempo in the middle of a song, changing key, changing the soundscape. It's for me, Jimmy Webb is the perfect marriage of cognitive and emotional. What's the opposite of dissonance?
Consonance.
Consonance, yeah.
But if we think of MacArthur Park, though, I mean, this is a remarkable song in that it lasted, was it 7 minutes 20 seconds or something in that region? And there's been speculation that it's some kind of, you know, psychedelic journey that's the vocalist or the songwriter is going on. But Jimmy Webb says it was just an autobiographical song.
Well, turning to a song that you have been part of in your life,
yeah.
We just wanted to sort of round off today's show by talking about We Don't Need This Fascist Groove Thing, because obviously it's one of your better known songs.
About this fascist groove thing, evil man with racist views, spreading all across the land. Don't just sit there on your ass and like that funky chain dance. Brothers, sisters, shoot your best. We don't need this fascist groove thing. Brothers, sisters, we don't need that fascist groove thing. Brothers, sisters, we don't need the matches groove thing.
At the time when you brought out, I mean, sort of dance music had not become as politicised. Black dance music, yes, but sort of white electronic dance music had not become as politicised. Did you think it was a brave move to bring out such a strong message, or was it just that you got feelings and you went for it?
It was gut feeling, really. It wasn't when the Human League split. It was like we couldn't think of enough ways to go fuck you. So part of it was to turn our back on the restrictions that we'd had, our self-imposed restrictions we'd had with the Human League, which was we never talked about anything other than kind of fantasy things. There was not even, we'd never talked about love, we never talked about politics, we never talked about lots of things. So all bets were off. All bets were off in terms of real instruments as well. So finally we could use a funk bass guitarist and rhythm guitar and all the things we love from Chic, basically, and all those kind of dudes. But the interesting thing was it didn't originally start out. We designed the groove, and it was so frantic. It was like 160 BPM or something. You know, it was so frantic that we thought, what does this remind us of? You know, it's like it feels kind of angry, but you can dance to it if you're mad, if you're a punk. You know, we saw ourselves as an electro punk funk band, really, to a certain extent, for that particular record. And we started looking at our, reams of cut up lyrics and stuff, and going. And I suggested we were looking at titles of funk songs and soul songs and dance songs from the record Mirror chart from America. I'm going, wouldn't it be funny if we had some words in there, like, because we were big Parliament Funkadelic fans and all that stuff. If we had stuff like, the word thang in there, or, and we were big fans of protest music. You know, we were big fans of, you know, we just listened to Chocolate City, you know, and this idea of being in somebody else's experience and having the bravery to say something about it, which meant something to people, and not worrying about whether it would sell or not, but you had to say it, which is why I am my a lot of hip hop lyrics now.
Yeah.
And we discussed that earlier. We thought we can finally say something. So it wasn't an earnest attempt to make a political record. In fact, the title was the last thing we came up with. We thought we were looking at doing cut-ups of all these different titles from the American charts and going like, "Hot US, I Feel Your Power." What the fuck does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It was we thought it was hilarious. It just sounds like something from a blaxploitation thing. We knew there was a serious point to it, and then we got to the verse where it mentions Reagan and Thatcher, Reagan, as fascist God in motion. And we said, this is it. We actually have hit upon something that we really like. How have we managed to shoehorn the word fascist into a nutcase electronic dance song? And that's when we came up with the song title and the chorus and all that stuff. And of course, that lyric was the reason why it got banned on Radio 1 by Mike, fucking Reed.
Yeah. Arbiter of taste, wasn't it, at that time, Mike Reed?
I keep bumping into him at Rewind, because you know he's the spokesman for the Brexit Party.
Oh yeah.
He was. He was the cultural attaché or whatever. I said, why did you ban that record all the time? Because, it's all right, Marty, don't worry, only a bit of fun. It might have been a bit of fun to you, and it'll kill my career. You know, our record company at that time were geared up and expecting it to go top 10. Seriously. Had it not got banned from Radio 1, we'd have been on top of the pops, and the rest, it would have changed our path.
Fascist Groove Thang was a marvellous record, Martyn. I absolutely loved it. I had the 12-inch for God knows how many years. But I was trying to work out what specifically were you responding to, because this was post Rock Against Racism and that sort of end of the 70s punk thing. And I know that Thatcher and Reagan appear in the song, but was there a particular event that made you think these thoughts?
No, it's just in the zeitgeist for us. We were, it was like round about, if I'm correct, I may be wrong, but I think it was round about the time that he was talking about the Star Wars initiative, and you know, it just seemed like, you know, as we mentioned on the third Human League album, the first track's called 5 Minutes to Midnight. It was the nuclear clock was getting closer and closer. This wasn't some theoretical thing. We thought it might actually happen. Yeah, it seemed like we were heading that way. So that's what generated our desire to protest.
Well, Martyn, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you this afternoon. It's been really fascinating sort of hearing tales from Sheffield of days gone by, and you're talking about the kind of sound installation work that you're doing now, and obviously that's an ever-developing area, I guess, as technology and ideas develop. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this afternoon, so thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Gaz. Si.
Thanks, Martyn. Mart, indeed.
Mart. You can call me Mart.